He had heard countless rumors about the woman across the hall since the very first day he dragged his boxers into the narrow corridor of the apartment building, and those rumors carried a strange kind of weight that made him pause every time he heard the faint sound of her heels striking the tiled floor. The neighbors called her the Dragon Lady, and though the nickname sounded childish, at first he quickly understood why no one laughed when they used it. They said her eyes were sharp like blades cutting through any excuse or lie. They said her voice was laced with fire that could turn a simple greeting into a warning. They said she had a presence that made even the landlord stumble over his words when she came to pay her rent. Noticed that she never joined any casual gathering by the mailboxes, where tenants sometimes exchanged half-hearted smiles or complaints about the rising costs of water bills. Instead, she walked past them all with her head high, her black hair flowing behind her like the tail of a storm, her steps never faltering, her gaze never softening. She seemed untouchable, like a statue carved from stone and guarded by flames, and yet she was not loud or rude. She was simply distant. She carried herself with an aura that said, "Do not come closer," and people obeyed for weeks. He only caught small glimpses of her, the door closing quickly as she slipped inside her apartment. The shadow crossing the stairwell late at night, the faint sound of her keys turning with precision as if she wanted no one to notice she was there, and yet her presence lingered in the building like smoke after a fire. He found himself listening unintentionally for the click of her shoes or the quiet sigh that escaped as she unlocked her door. She fascinated him, not in a romantic way, not yet at least, but in the way one is fascinated by a puzzle with missing pieces. He learned from gossip that she worked long hours, though no one could say exactly where. Some claimed she had a high position in a law firm, others whispered she was involved in something darker and more dangerous. One old tenant swore she had once seen the Dragon Lady in a confrontation outside the building where a man twice her size backed away from her in silence after she had said only a few words. Whether true or not, the stories added to her legend, and no one dared test her. He himself had no intention of testing her boundaries. He was simply trying to adjust to his new life in this apartment, managing his work, his bills, and his loneliness. He had thought moving here would be simple and quiet, but instead, he found himself in a place buzzing with silent tension. All because of the woman who lived across the hall. Sometimes he wondered what her life was really like behind the heavy wooden door. Did she sit alone at a small table with a glass of wine? Did she ever laugh at a movie or hum a song while cooking dinner? Or was she as cold inside her apartment as she appeared outside? I could not deny that there was something magnetic about her, though he told himself it was only curiosity, nothing more. Still, every time he carried his groceries past her door, every time he heard the faint echo of her footsteps above or below, he felt the atmosphere shift, as if the air itself bent around her, and he knew without a doubt that this neighbor, the Dragon Lady, would one day step directly into his life in a way that neither of them could ignore. She rarely spoke to anyone, and when she did, her words were sharp like blades, and the effect was immediate. Neighbors who once tried to strike up polite conversation by the stairwell or outside by the mailbox quickly learned to keep their distance. It was not that she screamed or cursed. She did not need to. She had a way of looking at people that seemed to burn away their excuses, leaving only silence in her wake. Her tone was calm yet final, and her eyes did not soften no matter the subject. There was the man on the third floor who once asked her for help carrying a heavy box. He thought it would be a simple request, perhaps even an opening for small talk, but when she turned her gaze on him and asked coldly if he could not handle it himself, he stammered out a weak Laughin carried the box alone, sweating all the way back up the stairs. Another time, a mother tried to smile and ask if she would like to donate to the building fund for holiday decorations. The Dragon Lady had raised a single eyebrow and said, with no hesitation, that decorations were unnecessary and money should not be wasted. The mother never asked. Again in the hallways, her presence was a signal for everyone to scatter. Conversations that buzzed with gossip or laughter would instantly die down the moment her footsteps approached. She did not stride like someone in a hurry, nor did she drag her feet like someone exhausted. Instead, she walked with a steady rhythm, heels clicking against the tile, like a metronome of authority, every step deliberate, every movement controlled. She carried herself like someone who belonged to another world, a higher world, where ordinary people had no right to intrude. Children in the building whispered about her, calling her a witch or a sorceress. Though they never dared to play near her door, they said she had the power to see through walls and know what people were thinking, though of course it was nothing more than childish imagination. Still, even their parents never corrected them entirely. For for there was something about her that felt more than human. He observed all this quietly from the safety of his own routine. He did not dare to become one of the stories told about her. He had no intention of provoking her or asking questions yet. He could not deny the strange pull she had on him, the mystery of someone who seemed completely detached from the world around her. What could make a person live like that? What had shaped her into someone who pushed everyone away so fiercely? Late at night he would hear her door open and close softly, and he would glance through the peephole just in time to see her disappearing down the stairs, her coat wrapped tight around her shoulders as if she were shielding herself from more than just the night air. She moved like someone always prepared for a fight, always prepared for disappointment, never letting herself be caught unguarded. He wondered if there was ever a time when she let the mask slip to him. She seemed like fire contained within glass, something dangerous yet controlled, something everyone wanted to stay away from yet could not help but watch. Her life appeared untouchable, like she had built invisible walls higher than the building itself, and no one dared climb them. He told himself that he would never be foolish enough to try, but deep inside, he knew that fate had a way of breaking even the strongest walls when the right moment arrived. He thought little of her presence most days until the evening when his own clumsy habits created a situation he could not avoid. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that hung heavy in the narrow hallways of the apartment building, and he had been trying to manage too many tasks at once. His apartment was small and cluttered, and the shelf in his living room had broken that morning, leaving his books piled across the floor. He told himself he would fix it quickly after work, but one thing had led to another, and now it was late. The room was dimly lit, and he was tired but stubbornly determined to fix everything at once. He balanced a bag of groceries on his arm while dragging the toolbox from the corner of the room. The bag slipped, and he caught it with one hand at the same time, reaching for the broken shelf. Pieces scattered across the floor. In that moment he realized his door was still slightly ajar. He had propped it open earlier to let in some air. The building always smelled faintly of old wood and damp plaster, but tonight the cool breeze was refreshing, so he left it without thinking. He did not imagine anyone would be passing by this late, so he paid no attention to the crack of light spilling into the hall. Instead, he focused on not dropping everything in his arms. His groceries clinked with the sound of glass jars rolling together, and his toolbox threatened to tip open with every uneven step. He moved like a man in a circus act, juggling chaos and trying to convince himself it was all under control. The shelf itself was heavier than he remembered. He dragged one side into place, while nudging the toolbox back with his foot. The groceries swayed dangerously, and he muttered under his breath, hoping the milk would not burst from the bag. He reached for the hammer, barely keeping his balance, and in that instant the box slipped from his grasp and clattered loudly across the wooden floor. Nails, screws and tools scattering like raindrops in every direction. He froze for a second, staring at the mess, and then cursed himself for being careless. He bent down, quickly trying to gather everything before the neighbors heard the racket, and complained he hated drawing attention to himself. The last thing he wanted was someone seeing him like this, but fate had already chosen its moment, and he had unknowingly left the stage wide open for an audience he never expected. For, through that crack in the doorway, a figure appeared, silent as a shadow. She had returned home earlier than usual, her steps slow and deliberate, her hand poised on the strap of her bag, her gaze instantly drawn to the commotion inside his apartment. And though he had not yet seen her, she stood there with eyes wider, cold mask slipping just slightly as she took in the chaotic scene before her. The dragon lady who silenced rooms and frightened neighbors had stopped mid-step, her body frozen in the doorway, caught between leaving and entering, between judgment and hesitation. She did not announce herself. She simply stared as if unsure what she was seeing, and for the first time, he had unknowingly pulled her attention directly into his world. The crash echoed through the narrow apartment as if the entire building had shaken from the sound, and for a moment he could only stare at the disaster he had created. The heavy shelf pieces leaned awkwardly against the wall. The toolbox had tipped completely over, scattering hammers, pliers and screws across the floor, while the grocery bag gave in to gravity and burst, its contents rolling and spilling in every direction. A jar of tomato sauce shattered into a red puddle that crept slowly across the wooden floor like something alive. Potatoes rolled under the couch, cans spun in circles before finally coming to a stop, and the milk carton landed with a dull thud, threatening to burst open. He dropped to his knees, trying to scoop up the mess before it spread too far, his hands sticky from the sauce, his knees pressing into scattered nails that pricked against his skin. His heart raced with embarrassment because he knew the noise had been loud enough to travel through the halls, and he pictured the neighbors peeking out, annoyed, ready to complain about the disturbance. He muttered under his breath, frustrated at himself for trying to do too much at once. If only he had closed the door, none of this would have mattered. He would have been able to clean in private, to curse in private, to fail in private, but the door was open, and the hall was no longer empty. She was there, though he did not realize it yet. Her silhouette stood just beyond the thin line of light cast from his apartment, her head tilted slightly, her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something far more unreadable. She had seen people stumble before, but never had she lingered, never had she stopped to witness such a personal moment of struggle. She was known for brushing past everything and everyone, yet here she was, unmoving inside. He scrambled to gather the tools and jars, his hands moving quickly as if speed could erase the evidence of his clumsiness. He knocked over a book in the process, then another, the once neat stack now spread like fallen dominoes. Across the sticky floor he groaned under his breath, pressing a hand to his forehead. He wanted to laugh and curse at the same time, and above all he wished no one had heard it. The silence in the hall was heavy, though he could not sense it yet, for the dragon lady had not moved her steps, had halted completely. She did not announce herself, she did not scoff or turn away. She simply observed, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat, as if she too was uncertain what to make of the scene before her. This man, her neighbor, was no longer a shadow passing by her door. He was a chaos of groceries, tools, and broken order, and the sight struck her in a way she had not expected. The building seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds were the quiet roll of a can still moving against the wall, and the quick, shallow breaths of a man trying to gather himself together. Before anyone could notice, but the moment had already been claimed. The dragon lady had seen it all, and she remained frozen, her presence hanging in the air like a flame refusing to be extinguished. At that exact moment she appeared, walking back from her late shift, her steps measured and steady, the sound of her heels sharp against the tile of the hallway. She carried a small black bag over her shoulder, her hair tied back neatly, though a few strands had escaped and framed her face. She looked as she always did, untouchable, precise, like a queen returning to her castle after battle, her expression unreadable, her eyes cold as steel, yet there was something softer hiding in the way she paused before her door. She was not supposed to notice him, at least not like this, yet the door left open had betrayed him, and the noise of his clumsy disaster had drawn her attention without effort. She turned her head, and her gaze fell inside her neighbor's apartment. Her eyes locked instantly onto the chaos. The spilled sauce, the scattered tools, the figure bent on the floor, scrambling to put order back into the mess he had made. She stopped in her tracks, completely stilled, her body freezing mid-step, one hand clutching the strap of her bag, the other hovering near the door handle, but unmoving for a moment. She was like a statue carved in the dim light, her sharp presence filling the hallway, yet her eyes strangely wide, as if caught by surprise. She did not blink, she did not speak. She simply stood there, staring at the scene unfolding inside the apartment. He kept muttering under his breath, trying to gather the cans and tools before anyone came to complain. He had not yet realized that anyone was already there. His back was turned slightly toward the door, and he focused only on wiping the sticky trail of sauce spreading across the floor. But then a shift in the air caught him, the faintest sense that he was no longer alone. He lifted his head slowly and turned toward the doorway. His eyes met hers, and everything inside him froze. The dragon lady, the neighbor who never spoke without cutting through someone with her words, the woman who never stopped for anyone, was standing there, in silence, watching him. Her expression was not cruel or mocking, but stunned, as if she had walked into something she could not explain. Her usual cold mask had slipped just enough to reveal a flicker of humanity, and that small break in her armor made his chest tighten with confusion. He felt heat rising in his face, embarrassment flooding through him as he realized she had seen everything: the broken shelf, the spilled food, the mess that made him look helpless and clumsy. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, to explain or laugh it off, but no words came out. His throat was dry, his mind blank, and all he could do was stare back at her, hoping she would either speak or leave. But she did neither. She remained frozen, her body still, her eyes locked on him, her breath caught, as if she too did not know what to do. And for the first time the silence between them was not cold, it was charged, filled with something heavy and unspoken. The hallway lights flickered once, as if echoing the tension, and in that single suspended moment the dragon lady had truly seen him, and she could not look away. She stopped in her tracks, her body caught between motion and stillness, as though someone had pressed pause on her entire being, her eyes fixed on him, her mouth slightly parted, yet no words leaving her lips. She had been called the Dragon Lady because of her fire, her sharpness, her ability to cut through any moment with a single look, but now her flame seemed stalled, her sharp edges dulled by the unexpected sight before her. The scene inside his apartment was nothing extraordinary in the grand scale of life, but to her it was disarming, for she had only ever known people to lower their eyes in her presence, to step aside, to treat her like a force to avoid. She had never stopped long enough to watch anyone else in their mess, and here he was, knees on the floor, hands sticky with spilled sauce, surrounded by tools and cans in broken order, and he was not pretending, he was not masking his failure behind politeness. He was simply caught as he watched. Her heart gave a strange quickened beat. Though her face did not reveal it, she had not planned to pause. She had meant only to return home, as she always did, in silence, with no interaction, and yet her feet refused to move. She stood rooted to the floor, her shadow spilling into his doorway, while he slowly rose from his crouch, his eyes wide with the same surprise, mirrored back at her. She could not look away, and that unsettled her more than anything. He, too, was frozen, caught between apology and explanation, but unable to produce either. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words followed. His voice had abandoned him. The longer he looked at her, the more aware he became of how ridiculous he must have seemed, covered in sauce, tools scattered like a battlefield of failure. His apartment, half lit, half ruined by his own clumsiness. He wanted to laugh, but the silence in her eyes stopped him. The hallway felt longer and darker, the air between them thick with unspoken weight. Her stillness was more powerful than any of the rumors that followed her, because it was not the stillness of arrogance, it was the stillness of something cracked, something caught off guard. She looked at him as though she had stumbled onto a truth she had not expected, and it held her in place. Seconds stretched like minutes, the building quiet around them, the only sound the faint dripping of sauce from the broken jar seeping across the floor. She could have turned. She could have walked away without a word, as she had always done. She could have dismissed the entire scene as beneath her notice, and yet she remained unmoving, frozen, not by disgust but by something else, something neither of them understood. For the first time in a long time, someone had captured her attention, and she did not know how to release it. She felt a shift deep inside her, like the walls she had built so carefully had been nudged by accident, and the crack was enough to let something unexpected through. She stood there, trapped by her own hesitation, unable to move forward, unable to retreat, her eyes locked with his, her silence louder than any words she might have spoken. He expected laughter or scolding, yet she said nothing, and the silence pressed down on him heavier than any words could. His mind raced, searching for something to say, but every phrase died before it reached his lips. He wanted to explain that it was nothing, that he was only clumsy, that the mess did not define him, yet the look in her eyes made every excuse feel small and useless. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, his palms sticky, not only from the sauce but from nerves that prickled through him like static. Her gaze did not waver, it held him as firmly as a hand might grip a shoulder, her eyes searching him in a way no one ever had before. There was no pity in them, no ridicule either, only a strange, focused curiosity that unsettled him more than anger would have. Anger he could handle, laughter he could endure, silence laced with curiosity, however, left him defenseless, because he did not know what she saw when she looked at him like that. He shifted his weight awkwardly, his shoe crunching against a stray screw on the floor, the sound breaking the stillness only for a moment before silence reclaimed the room. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to speak, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "I was just fixing the shelf," he said, the words trembling with the awareness of how foolish they sounded. He wished immediately he could take them back, replace them with something confident, something clever, but it was too late. Her expression did not change, her lips pressed together in a line that gave away nothing, her eyes still locked on him, as if she were reading a language written only on his face. He felt heat rise in his cheeks, again, embarrassment flooding him with a sharp edge, because he realized this was perhaps the longest anyone had ever looked at him without speaking, and he did not know how to endure it. Expected at any moment she would cut him down with a single phrase, maybe something about how careless he was, maybe a sharp remark about noise or clumsiness, maybe even a cold dismissal that would restore the distance between them. But none of that came. She remained still, silent, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he caught something behind her eyes, not anger, not coldness, but a hesitation that seemed fragile. Took a step forward, carefully mindful of the mess at his feet, and said, "I know it looks bad, but I can handle it, really." The words fell Flat, yet they were honest. He was trying to reclaim some shred of dignity, even as he stood there surrounded by chaos. His shoulders tense, his pulse quick. She tilted her head slightly. At his words, a small movement, almost imperceptible, yet it felt enormous in the weight of that moment. The silence stretched again, not cruel, but thick and heavy, as though they both stood at the edge of something unspoken. He realized then that she was not mocking him, she was not about to dismiss him, she was simply watching, and for reasons he could not understand that made him feel more exposed than if she had laughed in his face, and yet deep inside, where he did not want to admit it, he also felt a spark, a strange flicker that told him her silence meant more than words ever could. The silence stretched like a rope, pulling tighter, each second until she finally bent down, her movements deliberate and precise, the sound of her bag sliding softly against the door as she lowered herself into the frame of his open apartment. For a moment he thought he was imagining it, because the dragon lady never touched anything that did not belong to her, never crossed boundaries, never lowered herself in any way, and yet here she was, crouched on the floor, beside him, her hand reaching not for him but for the scattered mess between them. She picked up one of his books, the cover smeared faintly with sauce and dust, her fingers brushing it clean with care that felt almost unreal. She turned it over once, as if weighing it before placing it neatly onto the crooked shelf, her motion so calm, so quiet, that he forgot to breathe. He had expected a sharp word or cold dismissal, but instead, she had chosen to act silently, and that single choice broke through the walls of every story he had ever heard about her. He watched her in disbelief, his own hands frozen mid-air, as if he had lost the ability to move, while she continued without hesitation. She picked up another book and set it carefully beside the first, her movements smooth like water flowing around stone, and the room that had moments ago felt suffocating with tension, now felt transformed into something strangely fragile. He wanted to speak, but words seemed unworthy of the silence she was shaping. Her eyes did not meet his while she worked. They were focused on the task, as though the chaos of spilled belongings demanded her attention more than the man kneeling beside her. Yet there was something unspoken in the way she handled each item with care. She was not helping to be kind, nor to be polite. She was simply present, and in her presence there was no judgment, only action. It was as if she had chosen to step out of her distant world for a brief moment and exist fully in his. He slowly gathered himself and joined her, his hands brushing against hers once by accident. When they both reached for the same tool, a spark of heat shot through him uninvited, his heart thudding harder than before. He pulled back quickly, mumbling thanks, though the word felt fragile and thin against the weight of what was happening. She did not reply, her face unreadable, but she did not retreat either. She simply placed the hammer back into the toolbox and continued her quiet work. Each second stretched longer as they worked side by side, the silence no longer heavy with tension but filled with something unexplainable, something delicate that made the air feel charged. He realized then that this was the first time anyone in the building had seen her pause, the first time anyone had seen her bend down, the first time anyone had witnessed her doing something as simple and human as helping another person, and that thought alone made his chest ache with a strange mixture of awe and disbelief. When at last the books and tools were gathered and the mess somewhat contained, she stood again, rising smoothly with her usual composure, yet something in her eyes had shifted. She looked at him briefly, a fleeting glance that carried more meaning than any sentence could, and without a word she turned and stepped back toward her own door. The silence she left behind was no longer sharp or cold, it was heavy but warm, lingering like smoke after a fire. From that day, the distance between them began to shift in ways neither of them could explain. The building was the same. The neighbors whispered the same stories about the dragon lady. The air in the hallways still carried the faint smell of plaster and dust, but something invisible had changed the moment she bent down to help him. She had cracked the armor she wore like a second skin, and though she never spoke of it, the memory remained in his mind, like a flame that would not die. He could not forget the way she had frozen at the doorway, nor the way her hands had moved carefully over his scattered belongings. It was such a small act, yet it carried a weight that silenced every rumor he had ever heard about her. He found himself listening for her footsteps differently now, no longer with curiosity, but with awareness, as if every click of her heels down the hall was a signal, a reminder of that night, when she had crossed the boundary she had so carefully guarded. She too was not the same, though she did not show it outwardly. Her face remained unreadable, her posture as straight and proud as ever, but there was a hesitation in her steps, Sometimes a pause at her own door, as if she considered something unspoken. Her eyes lingered on him longer than before when they passed in the hallway, not with disdain but with recognition, the kind of recognition that bound to people in silence more strongly than words. He thought often about speaking to her properly to bridge the gap between them, but every time he tried to imagine the conversation, the words felt clumsy compared to the silence they had shared that night, the silence that had not judged him or mocked him but had revealed her humanity and his own vulnerability. Side by side he realized perhaps words were not what mattered with her, perhaps it was the weight of presence, the act of noticing, the simple truth of being seen. Neighbors still whispered in children, still told stories about the dragon lady, but he knew now that none of them had truly seen her. They had only looked at her walls, never at the cracks beneath them. He had seen a moment of stillness that revealed something far deeper, and though he did not yet understand it fully, he knew he would not let it slip from memory, because it was the first thread of connection between them. Time passed, and yet the memory did not fade. Every glance, every pause, every quiet moment in the hallway carried the echo of that first encounter. He could feel the distance narrowing, even if neither of them spoke it aloud. The dragon lady was no longer just a figure of fire and ice in the building. She was part of his story now, and he was part of hers. And so it began with nothing more than spilled groceries, broken shelves, and a moment of silence, yet it grew into something neither of them could deny, a shift subtle but undeniable, for when his dragon lady neighbor saw him by accident and stopped in her tracks, she had not only seen his clumsiness, she had seen him, and that truth lingered between them like a promise waiting to unfold.